Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. The courtroom was still. Not the kind of still that comes from peace, the kind that comes from weight, from a room full of people holding their breath because something true is about to be spoken. And truth, when it has been buried long enough, carries a sound all its own when it finally surfaces. Walter Hayes stood at the front. He was 79 years old, and life had carved him carefully. His shoulders had narrowed with the years. His jacket was clean, but worn at the elbows. His white hair was combed with the kind of careful attention a man pays when he wants to show respect, even when the world has not always shown it back. His fingers trembled anyway. "I survived Vietnam," he said. His voice was thin, the kind of thin that comes not from weakness, but from years of holding too much inside. "But I almost didn't survive after." No one moved, and not the man standing near the back wall. He stood the way men who have been trained stand, not rigid, not performative, just settled. Jack Thompson was 50 years old, dark hair threaded with silver, a faint scar tracing his jaw. His eyes were calm in the way that eyes become when they have seen enough of the world to know that the loudest thing in any room is rarely the thing worth watching. At his side sat Rex. The German shepherd was still as carved stone, sable coat, broad chest, ears forward, dark eyes resting on the old man at the front of the room with an attention that was almost human in its quiet patience. "I kept thinking that if I just paid a little more, they would stop." A pause that stretched like winter. "They never do." The room exhaled almost as one. And then Walter's gaze moved just once, slowly across the room, and found the dog. Rex did not move, but his eyes held. And somehow, in that stillness, everything that needed to be said between them was said. 1 week earlier, the wind had come to Jackson, Wyoming, the way it always did in November. Not as a visitor, but as an occupant, pressing itself flat against windows and doors, turning the morning pale and sharp. Miller's Market sat on the corner of Birchwood and Fifth, the kind of grocery store that had survived 4 decades, not because it was remarkable, but because it was reliable. The floors were worn smooth by years of boots and sneakers. The people who shopped there knew the cashier's name, asked after her mother, held the door without being asked. Jack pushed through the glass door without breaking stride. At 50, he still moved like the Navy SEAL he had spent 2 decades becoming. Shoulders squared, steps measured, eyes sweeping the room in the first 2 seconds without anyone noticing he had done it. Rex entered beside him, 7 years old, dark sable coat, movements fluid and unhurried in the way that comes from deep training and something older than training, a bond built not in a single moment but across 1,000 ordinary days, until the two of them had become, in the truest sense, extensions of each other. The plan was simple: coffee, bread, dog food, in and out. At the register, 2 people ahead, a young woman with a child on her hip, and beyond her, a man. Jack noticed him the way he noticed everything, without staring, without judgment. Late 70s, thin in the way that is not chosen, a jacket maintained past the point where maintenance could fully conceal its age, a plastic bag in one hand, light, his other hand already moving toward his coat pocket. Nothing unusual. Not yet. Then Rex stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Jack felt it the way he always felt it, not through the leash, but through something older and less explainable. A shift, a sharpening. A low sound moved through the dog's chest, barely audible, less than a growl, more like a recognition. Then Rex did something Jack had not seen him do in a long time. He turned his full, unhurried attention to the old man ahead in line. The cashier read the total without hurry, $23.86. The old man nodded, too quickly, the nod of a man who needs a moment and is hoping no one notices. He separated coins from his palm with the concentrated focus of someone for whom this was not an abstract exercise. Counting, recounting, still short. $3.86 short, sir, Cora said, voice dropped. Kind voices do that instinctively when they are trying to give someone a little privacy in a public place. The man 2 places behind Jack shifted his weight, sighed, not quietly, not accidentally, but pointed and deliberate. Then, low enough to claim deniability, but loud enough to land exactly where it was aimed. Should have counted before getting in line. Some of us have places to be. Walter flinched. It was small, it was brief, half a second, but Jack saw it, the slight drop of the shoulders, the way the old man's eyes moved down to his coins rather than up to respond. It was not embarrassment. It was the flinch of a man who had heard things like that before, who had, over time, perhaps begun to believe that he deserved them. Rex moved first. He stepped forward, slowly, without urgency, and pressed the broad, warm side of his head gently against Walter's hand. The coins stopped moving. Walter looked down. The confusion lasted only a moment, and then something happened in his face that was more moving than anything Jack had witnessed in years. It softened. Not at once, not dramatically, the way ice softens at the very first suggestion of spring, slowly, reluctantly, as though it has forgotten what warmth feels like and is only now beginning to remember. His fingers rested against Rex's fur. The dog did not move, did not shift, did not look away, just stayed, warm and solid and entirely present. Jack set his basket down on the divider. "Ring it all up," he said. "Sir?" "All of it. His and mine." Walter turned. His eyes moved across Jack's face quickly. The search of a man who has learned to look for the cost hidden inside every offered kindness. He found nothing but steadiness. "No," Walter said, firm with the firmness of pride, the last thing a man holds on to when everything else has been stripped away. "I don't take charity." "You're not," Jack said simply. "I am. There's a difference." Something gave way. "Thank you," Walter whispered. But even as he said it, his eyes had already moved, shifted to the glass doors, to something outside that Jack had not yet seen. A man, dark coat, collar turned up, not waiting for someone, watching, eyes on Walter. Walter left quickly, not urgently. Urgently would have drawn attention, and Walter Hayes, Jack was beginning to understand, had spent a long time perfecting the art of not drawing attention. The plastic bag swung. The eggs hit the concrete and cracked, spreading slowly across the ice, and something about that small, irreversible breakage cut through Jack in a way the confrontation itself had not. He stepped into the alley, not fast, not loud, simply present, the way a wall is present, solid and factual, impossible to ignore. Let him go. The man turned. Younger than Jack, broader through the shoulders, flat and calculating eyes. He looked at Jack, then at Rex. Rex had not growled, had not moved. He simply stood, absolutely still, and watched with a quality of attention that was, in its quietness, more unsettling than any display would have been. "You should walk away," the man said. "This is none of your business." "That man is my business," Jack said. "Right now." The silence that followed contained a decision being made. It fell the right way. The grip released. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "I do." The man walked out of the alley unhurried, retreating on his own terms. Jack watched until he was gone, then turned to Walter. The old man stood very still, broken eggs at his feet, plastic bag hanging from one hand. Not crying, past the age and energy for crying, perhaps. Simply looking at Jack with the exhausted bewilderment of someone who has been waiting for something bad for so long that something good has caught him entirely unprepared. Rex walked to him quietly and pressed his head against the old man's hand. Again. Walter's house was small and cold. Bills covered the kitchen table in careful stacks, which somehow made it worse than disorder would have. Disorder can be accidental. Careful stacks are intentional. Final notices, red ink at the top of more than one envelope. Walter put the bread away slowly, giving himself something to do with his hands. "I was going to pay him," he said. "I always do. I just needed a little more time." A pause. "I know how that sounds." Jack didn't answer. His eyes had stopped on a photograph. Black and white, faded at the edges. Two young men in uniform, squinting into a sun that no longer existed on any afternoon that could be returned to. Both of them straight-backed, both of them young in the way that only looks like confidence until you understand what they were about to walk into. One of them was Walter, younger, his eyes still holding something that decades had since quietly removed. "Where was this taken?" Jack asked. "Da Nang, 1969. He was my best friend. Grew up 3 streets over. We enlisted the same day, stood in the same line." A pause. "He didn't make it home." Jack looked at the photograph for a long moment, at 2 young men standing in a light that no longer existed, in a country that had demanded everything from them and given back less than it promised. He understood, fully, in the way that requires no further explanation, that what Walter Hayes needed was not sympathy. It was someone who would not look away. Jack made calls. Old contacts. People who still answered numbers they had been giving years ago for exactly these kinds of moments. Within days, quietly and without spectacle, a picture assembled itself. Small payments extracted under quiet threat. Elderly veterans targeted with the particular precision of predators who understood that shame is the most reliable silencer. Invisible, because no one had been looking. The work that followed was not dramatic. No doors kicked in. Just careful, patient, methodical dismantling. Records, names, dates, connections. And then, one at a time, men who had been silent for months began to speak. Walter was not the first one targeted, but he was the one who made the others possible. People came to Walter's house in the days that followed, one at a time, then more. They sat in the small living room and talked in the low voices of people who have kept something inside for too long. Walter sat among them, not at the edge of the room, in the middle of it, and something in his face over the course of those evenings began to reassemble into something that looked, slowly and tentatively, like a man who had remembered that he was worth being in the room. The evening before the courtroom, Jack stood outside on the sidewalk. The snow had stopped. The sky above Jackson was dense with stars, the particular abundance that only exists far from cities, the kind that makes a man feel both very small and somehow less alone in his smallness. Walter stood in the doorway. For a moment, he stood a little more upright, carried himself fractionally like a man who had been reminded of something he had nearly forgotten about himself. "Thank you," he said. Jack nodded once, then turned and walked into the cold. He was halfway down the block when Rex stopped. Through the window of the small convenience store on the corner, barely visible, an old man stood at the counter. Same posture, same careful, quiet stillness of a man counting what he cannot afford to be short on. Jack stood in the cold for a long moment. The stars were very bright. He exhaled, the breath of a man who has understood that this is not a thing you finish. It is a thing you keep choosing, every day, every ordinary morning when you walk into a grocery store with nothing more in mind than coffee and bread. He looked down at Rex. Rex looked up at him. "Yeah," Jack murmured, and together, without hurry, they stepped forward. Because this is what courage looks like when it isn't wearing medals or standing in front of cameras. It looks like a man and his dog walking into a cold Wyoming morning with no intention of changing anyone's life, and then noticing. Just noticing, and choosing in that small and ordinary moment not to look away. Walter Hayes survived Vietnam. He survived decades of silence and shame and the slow erosion that happens to a man when the world stops seeing him. And in the end, what finally reached him after all those years was not a program or headline or government form. It was a dog who stopped and a man who followed. If you believe that loyalty still matters, that one quiet act of kindness can reach places that nothing else can, that the most important thing a person can do on any given day is simply notice, truly notice the person standing right in front of them and choose not to look away, then you belong here. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales, because every week we come back to the same truth, that the world is still full of people worth showing up for, and the only question that has ever really mattered is whether we will. This story carries several layers of meaning that reach far beyond its narrative. The first is the reality of elder financial exploitation. Across the United States, older Americans, and veterans in particular, are among the most frequently targeted victims of financial predators. These crimes are systematic, quiet, and deeply underreported because shame keeps victims silent for months and years. This story illuminates that reality with a human face, without sensationalizing it. The second is the devastating cost of silence. Walter did not ask for help, not because help was unavailable, but because decades of self-reliance and accumulated shame had made asking feel impossible, had made him feel in some unspoken way that his suffering was a private failure rather than a crime being committed against him. Millions of older viewers will recognize that truth in themselves or in someone they love. The third is the extraordinary power of one act of noticing. Jack did not set out to dismantle a criminal network. He set out to buy coffee and bread. The entire story turns on a single ordinary decision to pay attention when it would have been easier not to. That decision is available to every person watching, regardless of age or circumstance. The fourth is the irreplaceable role of animals in human emotional survival. Rex's instinct to move toward Walter before Jack had fully processed what he was seeing reflects something deeply true about the bond between humans and dogs, particularly for veterans and the isolated. Animals notice what people hide, they respond to what people cannot say, and in doing so, they sometimes reach places that even the best human intentions cannot. And finally, this story is a quiet reminder that heroism is not reserved for battlefields. It lives in grocery store aisles and cold alleys and small houses with stacked bills on kitchen tables. It lives in anyone willing to stop, look carefully at what is in front of them, and take one small step forward. That is always worth telling. That is always worth remembering.